Welcome to the IpX True North podcast, where we connect people, processes, and tools.
All right. Well, hey there. Welcome back to everyone listening. For any first-time listeners, my name is Brandy Taylor, and I am the VP of Services for IpX, and that's the Institute for Process Excellence. We have a great discussion lined up today with Mr. Sean Stavropoulos, who I am really looking forward to hanging out with today. So for today's topics, just a brief intro, we're going to be talking about how you intentionally transition your decision-making as a company growing from what I would call a light and lean, scrappy startup over to the decisions that you need to make when you're transforming into a more mature state of business while you're starting to need to add some of those guardrails, right? And still maintaining the right levels of flexibility when you need to. And I think everyone understands, gosh, that is not always an easy balance to have. So Sean is a co-founder and the CTO at Boulevard. Boulevard is doing so many great things, and I feel it's a really good time in the trajectory of Boulevard to catch your ear, Sean, and really just get a status update on all the things that are going on with you and Boulevard. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, Brandy, for having me. And I absolutely look forward to sharing whatever knowledge I have and I've gained through the journey of Boulevard. So very much looking forward to it.
Awesome, excellent. I guess for our listeners' benefit, Boulevard is the first and only client experience platform purpose-built for appointment-based self-care businesses. So Sean, for starters here, I guess I would love for you to just go ahead and give us an overview of your personal journey and what Boulevard has to offer to our listeners.
Absolutely, more than happy to. I think what my journey throughout Boulevard and even before is somewhat typical and yet I think very approachable for anyone looking to get into the startup world, technology in general. And so, I'll start with a brief overview of myself, how I got to this point in my career, and then we can take it from there. So, I growing up, I was always a math physics nerd. I loved it. It was something that it piqued my interest a lot. And, I actually took up a bachelor's in Aerospace Engineering, which I believe is similar to some of your background as well, at Cal Poly State University here in Central California. And, my first job out of college, I worked in the aerospace industry for a couple of years, and arguably one of the largest companies in the world at Honeywell, over 100,000 employees. It was the epitome of heavy process and very structured working environment. And after being there about 2 years, I realized that, I wanted more of a challenge, and I wanted to be more in control of, my career trajectory and the growth that I had, and ended up realizing that I just wanted to be in software. It's something I had toyed around with for fun on the side, but never really saw it as much of a career until I had a career, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting and hoping for. And so when I left the aerospace industry and joined as an entry-level software engineer at a company called Fullscreen back in the day here in Los Angeles, and was there for about 3 years, a little over 3 years, was promoted multiple times, ended up becoming the VP of engineering at Fullscreen, leading a team of 20 to 30 engineers. And, over that experience really helped solidify to me that, I am deeply, excited by building high scale technology companies and solving real problems for real people. And so after Fullscreen was acquired, my co-founder at the time, he was the VP of product, I was the VP of engineering. And, we had this idea to start Boulevard, which, I'm certainly happy to dive into a bit more. And so, the founding story of Boulevard came down to, 1 week where my hair was a mess. And, my co-founder, being a good partner at the time, was giving me a very hard time. He's saying, hey, Sean, you look far too much like an engineer. You need to go get that taken care of. And I remember at the time, I'd be working all day at my day job. And when I'd get off work and think about all the personal things I needed to accomplish, like scheduling a hair salon appointment, at that time, the hair salon was closed for the day. And unfortunately, in Los Angeles at the time when we started Boulevard about 7 years ago, 80 to 90% of all the appointment-based businesses in Los Angeles, you had to call to make an appointment. And if they're closed, you can't make an appointment. And, at that time, Uber, Postmates, all of these different experiences really targeting the consumer were blowing up. And yet we were just mystified as to why the personal care industry seemed so far behind the times and why it was so inconvenient to do business with. And, both of us knew virtually nothing about the beauty space and the technology in this space. And, so what we did, as anyone should do if you're interested in getting into a new market, is go talk to lots and lots of customers. We spent our nights and weekends talking to any small business around Los Angeles that took appointments and was willing to talk to us. And at that time, I think we had to start saying we were college students working on a research paper. If a business thought you were selling them something or would eventually sell them something, they didn't really want to talk to you. But for us, we really were just interested in learning. And after probably dozens, if not over 100 meetings throughout all types of small businesses in Los Angeles, we came to the conclusion that this really was a technology problem that plagued this industry. They weren't on pen and paper. Everyone was using some type of technology. It just wasn't good enough and didn't solve the real problems they had. They still had to have an army of front desk receptionists scheduling the calendar in a way that would optimize and, help protect the revenue of the business. And there were just, problem after problem that prevented them from being convenient for consumers and clients. And so after hearing the same story over and over again, we came to that maybe naive conclusion that we had what it took to make a difference in this industry. And that led us to quitting our jobs and going all in. And that was 7 years ago at this point. And now fast forward to today, we've got 240 employees and growing, Series C funded. And couldn't be more proud of the team that we have.
Very cool. Wow. I mean, it's it's a cool story. And I love, speaking to people like yourselves that have these stories, because I feel like everyone has a moment in time where they have a hobby or a something, or, just a conversation with a friend or a family member that's like, we could do this. And we could do, let's go and see, we could do this. And a lot of times people just don't actually take that next step. And so I love that it's kind of fell upon you in kind of a gifted way. And it was a bit of a hobby of yours, and it just kind of turned into something really fantastic. So it's just
absolutely,
I love it.
Yeah. Anything to not have to pick up the phone these days, huh?
There's that too, right? I think everybody is very, very in tune with and prefers to schedule and do all those things for themselves. It's no longer as much of I want to speak to a person anymore.
Right.
And it's not that we don't want to, have relationships and things, but it's changed, right? And that somehow is now perceived as more of a hassle, right? That I actually have to call and wait and speak with someone, and they put me on hold and all of that, when if I can just go to my app or go online and do what I want to do, that seems very simple and it takes me 1 minute. I think that's the preference these days.
Absolutely.
So I think we just need to ebb and flow and evolve along with the wants and needs of the industry and of the markets, right? So
you got it.
So I think it's just a kind of a fun thing, and it's a fun opportunity, and it seems like the right place at the right time in so many ways.
Really was, yes.
So very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I guess I'd like to jump in a little bit into a little more slightly technical talk. But I want to talk about product complexity here for a bit. And what does it mean, what I think of hitting that sweet spot, right? And I feel like Boulevard's navigated this quite well. So it seems like you've been able to determine what that sweet spot is for this solution. And it's in a sea of many competitors, a lot, all working to kind of meet those needs and wants of the industry today and trying to make themselves shine. So I guess my question for you is, early on, how did you and Boulevard assess the market? I know you said you just started talking to people and all of that, but once the company was started and you're like, okay, now we have to really develop something. How did you define that threshold about what features that you would incorporate and to ensure that you're competitive and optimized and, and all those, and make good use of your resources? Because as a startup, you have no choice but to do such.
Absolutely. A great question. And, I think if I were to go back and describe the initial product that we had in our minds, it looks quite a bit different than what we have today. In the very early days, we were laser focused on, we're going to be the best scheduling engine only. We're gonna own that source of truth of available appointments and know, when staff are scheduled, and anything outside of those boundaries, we're not going to distract ourselves with. We didn't want to do credit card processing. We didn't want to do time clock management, inventory management, commission calculation. Like, there's so many factors and aspects to running a small business. And we had this hunch that, if we could just do one thing and do it one thing really well, then the rest would fall into place. And unfortunately, that was very much not the case. As we started learning and immersing ourselves in this market and environment, we realized that, there are some competitors out there. Most of the more well-respected technology in the space was a couple decades old at this point. Our market is what's referred to as a brownfield opportunity. There are technology solutions. There are companies out there that have been building product for the beauty industry for decades. And unfortunately, it just wasn't, it hadn't evolved to meet the same expectations that customers have. But, regardless, there was technology for the space already. And so we weren't coming into a brand new market and developing something that's, wildly innovative that, nothing else out there is doing. And so really we had to come in and do something better. And what we realized through a lot of our early conversations is that these businesses actually needed a far more horizontal solution. They could not function with a disconnected point of sale that was different from their calendar. When you have, front desk receptionists, often with high turnover, they can't have a whole lot of training. They can't be stitching together a dozen solutions for the operations of a business. They really needed something that, could walk that customer through their entire journey from online booking to payment collection and then helping them pay out their staff members. If we couldn't actually provide a solution that helped from start to finish in their entire flow of funds, then it wasn't going to be good enough. And so this was a really hard pill to swallow in the early days because, you always hear you have to be absolutely laser focused on one thing. And, for us, I think, keeping that open mindset and really just immersing ourselves in the problems of our customers, that led to the realization that there actually isn't an opportunity to be laser focused on one thing. More than anything, they need a platform that can be extended, and they need something that be that central pillar of the technology of those organizations. And so, that I think was, it was a hard pill to swallow, and ultimately led to us having to build a lot more product in the early days. But it was what we determined and realized was the way we were going to win. And, in this space, especially if you were to go on Google and search for appointment scheduling software, you're going to find hundreds of solutions. It seems like this has to be a problem that's solved. But what we realized is, as you start to dissect the market and break it out into different types of customers, that there was a pretty meaningful hole in the technology offering. And what we realized, and where we ultimately decided to focus, was let's go after the more complex businesses, the large single location, the multi-location chains. That's where we felt like we could count on one hand the number of solutions these businesses could reasonably use, and none of them were beloved. And so for us, we're like, there's a very obvious hole in this market. And while it's certainly a more challenging segment of the market to go after, that's where the real opportunity was. And so for us, the way that we approached that was, I think what we did really well in the early days was align ourselves with that next ideal customer. After talking to dozens and hundreds of customers, we started to really learn the landscape and, learn who the respected businesses are and the ones that we felt had the right teams in place to continue to grow and do things right. And this industry also is very heavy on referrals, and everybody knows everybody. And so, we needed to make sure we approached this market in a thoughtful way and continued to be adored and respected. And so for us, it really came down to being very meticulous and particular about, okay, who do we really want to use our product next? and let's do everything we possibly can to get them on board, happy, using it, and then let's move on to the next customer. And so in the early days, we my co-founder and I would sit in the hair salon. My co-founder would be answering phones, scheduling appointments. I'd be, in the back, making new features in real time. And, the two of us just immersed ourselves as much as possible and got to the point where we had our next target customer in mind, and we did everything we possibly could to make them happy before moving on to the next one. And I think that leapfrog approach of, every time we'd pick that next ideal customer that, expands our product in some meaningful way along the trajectory that we knew we wanted to grow. And that's how we developed the MVP. And oftentimes, it's a combination of listening to their pain points, seeing it firsthand, and then, rather than building everything for them, it came down to, how can we work together and ultimately be their business coach on, like, these are the things that Boulevard's really going to be well equipped to solve. And these are going to be some of the things that, we're going to have to, partner with another solution out there. And, really it came down to helping align the entire industry on what we believed our software would be able to support versus what they need to look elsewhere. But, just having a really open and honest conversation about how we're going to solve their most important problems first and foremost. And so I think that approach that we took on always having that next ideal customer profile and target customer in mind and being as focused on that customer as possible is what allowed us to grow to a point where, we had some of the most respectable, not very many, but some of the most respectable businesses at that time starting to use Boulevard that really paved the way for us to, expand out from there.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's such a journey, just thinking about, your initial goals and objectives and how quickly they may need to change and how adaptable you need to be with that. Because I think that there are those different trains of thought, right? It's we must specialize. This is our differentiator. This one thing we're amazing at and no one else is good at. But what you also find is that, like you said, is that can backfire, because what people also want, and depending on, the wants and needs of your industry or even your specific client, is we want a one-stop shop. We don't want, but we don't want too much complexity with regards to how many tools I need to use. We really want one main tool that covers all of my most important things.
Yeah.
And then, the things I don't do often, maybe I could do this over here, or do this over here, or however.
Exactly. And, I think a great example for us was, inventory management. That we do not have the desire to be the best inventory management solution out there. That's a problem that, entire companies are focused on. But what we've realized is that, okay, if we offer at least baseline level functionality in all of these different areas, and if your business is extremely heavy in retail, or, you want an experience where all of your employees can swap shifts with each other and, have a lot of, that delightful, employee management experience, those are things we're not going to build, but we'll have some baseline functionality. And then for businesses that want to go deeper in any one area, that's where partnerships and integrations and, being able to work well with other solutions in the market, I think, is the path that we've taken. And so far it's worked out really well.
Great. Yeah. Very good. Very good. And, even with so much intentionality, it's just amazing how much you just learn by doing. And I'm sure, for you looking back at those early days, are there any lessons learned that really stand out to you that you could share that might help others navigate similar kinds of scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, aside from maybe some of the common ones, like, if you were to go back towards the beginning of Boulevard and ask us how long we'd think it would take to get to any, certain point, product building always takes longer than even seasoned experts think. And, lots of learnings along the way. But I think something that we did really well in the early days was a maniacal focus on not overbuilding. And I think it's always a really hard line to toe, where it's, you don't want to underbuild, you don't want to overbuild, and how do you try to find that line? And I think for us, one of the approaches we took is, while I've said that we had maniacal focus on that next target customer, while that's true, we also from the very beginning had a vision of some of the largest national chains in the country, the Dry Bars, the Massage Envies, the name brands that have hundreds or more locations across the country, and thinking through what are the problems they're going to need at scale. And so while we didn't necessarily build for those use cases out of the gate, that was always a thought in our development process. And I think that over time, as we've grown and now we do power some very large national chains, it wasn't a complete change in technical approach going from a single location hair salon to a national chain. And so for us, I think one of the best lessons that I've learned, and some areas where I think that we did that well, and some areas where I wish we'd had even more focus on this in the early days, was that striking the right balance between solving today's problem versus leaving the door open and building in a way that it's not going to be a rewrite or a huge overhaul in approach, being able to solve tomorrow's problem and a problem for a year down the road. And so I think that it takes a lot of time up front to put into trying to determine what our next year's problem is going to be and which ones do we want to start to factor into the development process. But for us, we had this vision and we knew we were going to be growing quickly. And so how can we blend a laser focused approach on one salon's problems while leaving the door open and building in such a way where when the time is right to start to expand in a more thoughtful and complicated way, that it's not going to be a dramatic change. And so I think that approach was something that we always talked about. In the very early days, what is Dry Bar going to need? What are these large national chains going to need? And let's start to factor that into how we build product today. And, I think as an example, on day one of our product, we had multi-location support. And, while the first few salons and spas that we onboarded did not have multiple locations, that was an example of something that we knew if we wait to try and figure this out, we may never get there. It's going to be so much, the longer we wait, the more complicated that type of expansion and investment's going to be. And so there were a few of these really core when it comes to your data model, when it comes to how you represent and think about the landscape of data that you need to collect, being very thoughtful with trying to be as comprehensive as possible in the early days so that as you continue to expand, it's not going to be the end of the world. And so that's one area where I think we did really well, and that led to a hyper growth expansion down the road.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to point out. I think because people get very focused on the most robust solution for this application, and sometimes when you do that, you might pigeonhole yourself into something that may be very difficult later to append, to add on, to expand. You may have to redevelop that piece. And so I think what I hear you saying is, I think about it in terms of like some of the neighborhoods that you drive through that are being built. It's like there's this beautiful neighborhood, but then there's these tiny little pieces of road that just kind of dead end. But what they've done is they've had that forethought, right? And you're thinking about the next development and the next piece and the add-ons. So you have that core functionality with the flexibility that's out there that you
Absolutely.
can grab onto and tag into. And so I think that's super important to do, especially when it might even take you a little more time and resources right now to do that. But in the long run, that proper planning really helps you with more robust execution later at a later date.
Absolutely. And, I think my second learning that I'd like to share is the team that you build is often even more important than the product. And in, all of our investment conversations, there was so much focus on the team that we had and surrounding ourselves with the best in class people that have solved these problems before, have been in the industry. I think was something that in hindsight we did really well without even necessarily having that maniacal focus on the team. It really just came down to us being relentless on reaching out to best in class people, cold outreach emails on LinkedIn, and, just talking to people about the problems we're solving. And that led to, I think, more and more folks getting interested in our problem, seeing how genuine we were about wanting to make a difference in the industry. And, over time, we built a world-class team just that often didn't start out as recruiting conversations. It started out as us just trying to spark up conversations and learn from industry experts that eventually wanted to join. And I think that for us, first-time founders, it was so important for us to surround ourselves with people that had been through this journey before and people that we could learn from. And so, I think that throughout all of our investment conversations over the years, the team that we had was often equally, if not more important than what we had built at that time. And so, don't be afraid of continuing to grow your team early and bring on experts that are going to help you through the way.
Yeah, I think that's great. Find that passion, find the people that share that passion with you, and usually that feeds on each other. That's always people piece is really important. It's really big.
Absolutely.
Now, at IPX, we're really big on process. We're always process first, tools follow. We really try to think about how, your ways of working, and then, utilizing your tool to enable that. And that's exactly what I heard you say, is we were in the stores, we were doing the jobs, we were defining what the process is before we went and configured or customized the tool to do that. And I think in a way, process is really important. And I know some people, don't love process for some good reasons, but it does create, a standardized and consistent way of working that can be measured and improved, quantitatively. So I think that's always very important. And, as you progress as a company, maintaining the right level or the sweet spot of rigidity and flexibility in your processes becomes really important for you to consider with your trajectory of your company, right? Is what you did 7 years ago from a process perspective is probably very different than the way you manage your teams today. So can you talk through a little bit about your journey in process development, from the early days and where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the early days, admittedly, probably like most startups, we had no process. I think that we had just this master vision of where we wanted to be, and learned day by day how we're going to get there, and learning about each customer's problems. And so I think in the early days, up through even our Series A round of fundraising, there wasn't a whole lot of rigorous process that we followed. It was our team, especially on the R&D side, over-indexed in strong individual contributors. And with myself at a lot of the R&D helm, and my co-founder being our product head for the most part, it was very top-down driven. Ourselves often not dictating, but having that very close in tune vision of, here's what we're working on now, this is what we're going to work on next. There's not a whole lot of negotiation or just different options. It's like we had such a clear vision of what we needed to do by when to be able to continue to grow. But then that started to shift when, now, especially going towards our Series B round of fundraising, the team was growing to over 100 people. There's too many projects for any single person to, really be intimately familiar with. And the amount of especially engineers and people writing code that we had on the team started to become, burdensome, and more than any one person could really keep in their head. And that's where in hindsight, we were probably too late on some of the process improvements, but we started to bring in some incredible VPs across both product and engineering. We started to balance the individual contributors that we had with better engineering management, and making sure that everyone has a manager who's really there for them and can help them grow and learn about the career growth ideals for everybody on our team, and make sure that everybody is growing in the ways that they want to be. And so I think that now we work in very clear 6-week dev cycles that break down into sprints, and all of that is making sure that everything that we're doing is aligned in the same direction. So we've got very clear company KPIs around growth and keeping our customers happy and low churn, and all of these now distill down into each team, where the development of the team is far more bottoms up today. There's very little that myself and our C-suite dictates about the roadmap. It almost always comes down to now our team, who knows best, working closely with our customer success team, working closely with our sales team to identify what's going to move the needle in all of these different ways the best. And I'm so thrilled to have such a collaborative development cycle where our teams are working together to make the best possible judgment that they can on what's going to be most important. And things that we today I still couldn't tell you how many story points per sprint our teams are doing. It's just not something that we place a huge emphasis on. But there are absolutely some elements that are very important. The amount of bugs or customer found defects that we're finding, how long we take to perform onboarding and migrations, and just a lot of the aspects that lead to how can we get customers happy using our product, and not to be our guinea pigs finding bugs. A lot of these things we have very tight tracking of, and stay very close in tune with. But when it comes to a lot of the just general software development, I think what's best more than anything is to give people the vision of what problem are we solving now, and what problem is going to come next. And I think when you give people more and more information, it helps them make the right decision. And so for us, more so than placing a huge emphasis on the number of story points you're committing, it really comes down to everyone needs to have all of the information to be able to understand the context. And if a saying that we like to, or my co-founder and I often talk about, is an engineer and our team members, myself included, people will fill up all available time working on a particular product if there's no vision of what comes next. Yeah. Because there's no guardrails on how they should be managing their time and how much time is appropriate to spend on any particular thing. And so for us, the most impactful way we've been able to help solve that is by sharing information and helping make sure that all teams have the knowledge of what comes next and why we're working on the thing that we're working on. And I think that more than anything has helped just keep people aligned.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like you have the right balance, at least in your mentality of, early on it's easy. You have everyone sitting in a room, so you don't need a lot of process. You just have the conversations and you're able to make decisions and be consistent because there's no one else to do it. And so as you grow, that's that scalability. That's what we find, with most companies is they do really well for a period of time. And then at some point they struggle to throttle. And that scalability piece is really important. So figuring out, where is the right place to put those guardrails and give them some of that guidance, but yet not stifle, their ways of working, and make sure they're empowered and motivated at what's next. Yeah. Keep them going and all of that. And it's a very motivational way to think about it, but I think it's also really good leadership that provides that vision. So it's not just the right guardrails, it's also that leadership that you guys are providing that helps keep those people hungry and moving. So.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to, there's certainly been some hiccups along the way, and products that we get to what we thought was a finish line to only realize, oh no, this actually isn't an adequate release that we're gearing up for, and we need to make some material changes. And I think as you hit those breaking points and challenges, that helps influence, oh no, we really do. It is time for us as an organization to have a really thoughtful product brief, a really thoughtful product requirements document before we go and have engineers spend a bunch of time. And I think that there's a lot of learnings along the way that, when products hit a certain size, it's too risky to have engineers go and just start writing code before everything is aligned on. And unfortunately, over time, we had to learn and experience a lot of those hurdles ourselves. But, now I think we're at a place where before any engineer ever touches a line of code, there's complete alignment on the problem we're solving and how the approach that we're going to take to solve that problem. And that's something that, in hindsight, we should have done earlier.
Yeah. And I think that sounds like a really good risk mitigation technique with regards to, early on, maybe it's one person, one developer that, they waste a few days or whatever that means, we can recover from this. But as your team gets bigger, you can no longer do that when you have maybe 3 developers working on something for 3 days. Like this becomes very opportunistic, and we could be focused in knocking out other things and hitting other goals and milestones. So
absolutely.
So I think that risk mitigation technique is really important. And sometimes that does add process, and it does seem like more work at times for some, but with that bigger picture perspective, I think it's really streamlining the work that you do, and overall is really mindful.
For a company like Boulevard, our engineering hours and time spent building product is the most expensive thing that we have as a company, and there's nothing that would make a bigger difference than making sure our R&D team is as focused on the right problems at the right level of detail as possible. And so now, especially more than ever, as much as we can accelerate and optimize where we're spending our R&D expenditure and time, that more than anything is going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, very important. I think about, and I don't know how, it's hard to see the future of how fast you're going to expand, how you're going to grow. Is there any kind of forethought at this point with regards to process of when we hit, this milestone or this amount of employees or whatever that may be, that threshold, what do you have any ideas of what you might do to scale processes at this juncture?
Yeah. So, within the last year, we actually hired what's called a product operations team. And it's a relatively new discipline that is, really focused around how can we make our entire software development lifecycle as structured and, thoughtful as possible. And so, oftentimes the whole product development lifecycle falls in the hands of your product managers and your software engineers and everyone working together to try and communicate as effectively as possible. And, I think that realizing that often the skill sets that your product managers and your lead engineers excel at often isn't process, and it isn't taking a step back and evaluating the entire product life cycle and figuring out, well, what could be better along the way. And so, for us, something that's made a very material change in the last year is bringing in experts that are the glue between the teams that we have, and can help facilitate enabling our product managers to do the best work that they can and not have to be too bogged down with, what is the format of our PRDs, how do we want, when is the right time to start doing user research, and laying out a lot of the foundation for how we develop product rather than going through the motion is something that I've seen make a material change to our company. And so now that we've got a product operations team that is really focused on these areas, it's about enabling them to observe, identify, and propose opportunities for improvement as well. And so I think that for us, just as you would invest in the operations functions of your CS team and your sales team, it's becoming more and more common that, if we can accelerate the work that all of our R&D teams are doing by investing in and providing personnel that can, just be laser focused on those problems, it'll make everybody more efficient. And so, we're excited to continue to invest in just enabling everybody to be as effective as possible in the disciplines that they're in. And I think that often results in new people performing tasks that historically weren't just dedicated jobs. I think we've got the right team to continue to figure out what the next most critical problem to solve is now.
Yeah. And I think that ability to be adaptable and be willing to adapt and easy to adapt and improve, I think is really important. And especially as you guys mature as an organization. And, I'll bring up COVID just as an example, as I know it's been super rough for so many organizations that we work with on a daily basis, but gosh, especially to very small size organizations. who may not have an overage of resources to buffer with. And so I'd love to hear, how did COVID affect Boulevard over the past few years, and how did you guys adapt with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID had a extremely material impact to our company and our industry. When COVID first hit, I think 98%, if not more, of our businesses were closed. We make money when they make money. And so for, quite a while, there was relatively zero revenue coming into Boulevard. We were waiving our subscription SaaS fees for businesses that were closed. And, at that point in time, there was just very little activity happening. I think we were all optimistic that things would come back. And, we had this shift to fully remote culture. Luckily from the very early days, our first full-time engineer ever was remote, lived actually internationally, wasn't even in the US. And so from the very beginning of Boulevard, we were very remote friendly as a company. And especially on the R&D side, everything we did was in the spirit of remote friendly culture, and, lots of asynchronous communication, lots of Zoom meetings all the time. So when we shifted to fully remote work, it wasn't a dramatic shift to how we operated because we were operating in that environment already. But I think the biggest change that we saw was in the mentality shift of our customer base. Going pre-COVID, so many businesses were just used to, large walk-in queues at their business. If someone wants a haircut, they could just walk in and wait, and they didn't need to prioritize appointments as much. But, throughout COVID, businesses realized that, what customers expect and what the experience they need to offer is now very different. They need to be prioritizing appointments. They need to be making it more convenient for customers so that, they can operate in a healthy, sane way. And so I do think that the mentality shift that we saw in the industry accelerated adoption of Boulevard and accelerated, how important it was for small businesses to be convenient to interact with. And so, throughout COVID, not only did we get some really large customers that, when's a better time to switch your operating system as a business than when you're closed? Often if you're open 7 days a week, you've got, appointments lined up for weeks or months into the future, and you are operating every single day. It can be very daunting and challenging to even think about switching your operating system. And so I think during COVID, we saw a huge uptick in new signups, even though they weren't open yet. And we just saw this huge mentality shift of customers wanting to be more convenient to interact with. And so, overall, even though revenue was really low, I do think that it helped accelerate adoption and the importance of a solution like Boulevard for the entire industry.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really took that opportunity to connect and reach out, and it was just eyes were open at that point with, what are the opportunities? What can we do in this downtime, for one? Yeah. Also, what does this mean moving forward? We don't really know how it's going to come out of it. And so instead of trying to sell the product in some light, you're saying, you don't have an option. You need this product. This is going to help you. This is going to continue. This is going to be your best asset as you move forward. And so
exactly. And I think for us, some things that certainly helped is that we had closed our Series B round of fundraising literally the week of COVID shutdowns. March 2020, that's when we closed our Series B round of fundraising. And so we were very well capitalized going into COVID, where we, the struggle for us wasn't, oh no, we now have to go out and fundraise and the entire environment looks awful and, we're making no money. And so we had more optionality because of our financial situation at the time, where, we knew that we just had to optimize for, a year or two down the road rather than in 3 months. And so, being in, I think, a healthy financial situation at the time allowed us to make some of those potentially more risky decisions that, actually, rather than pulling back and having layoffs and reducing our company footprint to try and weather this storm, it's, we had full belief at the time that the world would come back. Appointment-based businesses were going to reopen. Hair still grows whether or not, you're out in the world. And so we really knew that at some point the world's going to come back, businesses are going to reopen, and, the world will hopefully return to some form of normal. And so we actually overinvested in engineering during COVID. And we're saying, all of these other companies are having layoffs, all of these other, environments are changing. Maybe we can capitalize on that. Let's double down on R&D spend. Let's continue to take this as an opportunity to, make some material, enhancements to the product so that as businesses start to reopen, we're already leading the way and we're already, moving as fast as we possibly can. And I think that, I'm glad we made all those decisions, and I'm glad all of our investors were on board with that, because, I think that period of time was super critical to our growth.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting timing for you guys, and it's kind of, well, heads down, guys. Everyone's time to come on, team. It's time to let's focus. Yeah. Let's use this time. We've got the resources, so let's do it. So I think that's really great. It's a really good story, and I think it's a good outcome. And I think there's things that happen in life, and I think that's a really good way to think about it. Is well, how do we shift? How do we utilize this time to our advantage? So, I guess thinking about, I know we're out of COVID at this point, and you guys are probably all, everyone's back in business and probably pretty darn busy at this point. So thinking about what's next for Boulevard, what are your overarching goals and objectives that you guys are aiming for, let's say, for the remainder of this year and maybe even next?
Yeah, great question. I think that one theme that has become more and more prominent throughout our company's life cycle is the importance of keeping employee retention high. We, especially for fast growing startups where you're placing a tremendous effort and focus on hiring and bringing on new people, I think it's been, and it is even more important to place that same amount of emphasis on keeping all of your existing employees happy. And so for us, everything we can do to keep our employees informed, engaged, everything is top of mind for us. Absolutely. And the next major milestone for the company is preparing to be IPO-able. We're at a place where, we're very well capitalized. We're growing at an increasing rate, and now we start to look to a lot of the similar companies in other verticals that have gone through the whole venture startup scenario and eventually IPO. And for us now that we've gone through lots of different compliance audits, lots of different mature company steps along the way, where now next step for us is how can we continue to focus on the rigor that we have, the stability, our forecasting ability to be really really informed on where we are today and how the business is growing in thoughtful ways. And rather than continuing to break into new verticals, like we're not going after more and more different types of businesses. We're very happy with the verticals that we're in, and now it's about optimizing those and making sure that we can do everything we can to, if you're a hair salon or a spa in the United States, it should be a no-brainer that Boulevard's the best fit for you. And, today that's not always true. If you offer certain types of services or, over-index in large group party appointments, like there are experiences still that Boulevard may not be best optimized for. And so, right now it's about optimizing where we are, helping reduce and build in a greater ability for us to forecast effectively. And so that's where a lot of our focus is right now is just being the best we can in the areas that we're in today, and continuing to hone our processes and, implement things like revenue recognition on the financial side and things that you shouldn't be worried about in the early days. But as you continue to grow, they become more and more important to just be able to operate effectively and on par with best in class industries out there.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well, I guess just in closing, I have a few smaller, lighter questions to, for some of the listeners who, maybe they're like-minded individuals as yourself, or, just finding some synergies with this conversation, or just resonate with the journey that Boulevard has been going through. I guess thinking about, the past 7 years, what has been the hardest part for you forming this company?
Yeah. I think the hardest part came down to fundraising, honestly. The the technology was, we knew what needed to be done. It was, it was a lot of work, but it wasn't mysterious work. And I think for us, and this would be very different depending on the market that you're in, but, while the main goal often when you go into investment pitches is to convince the investors and convince, your potential partners that your team is best equipped to solve these problems. And I think for us, it wasn't obvious going into a lot of our investment pitches that there even was a problem in this industry. I think for so many investors out there, scheduling software has been around for decades. Like, why is this a problem still? And so, for us, we had to not only convince all of our potential partners along the way that, not only were we the best team and was our product the best product to solve this problem, but that there actually was a problem. I think that, for many newer industry, if we were in drones or AI or cannabis or who knows what, all of these newer industries, that there's a huge focus on them, and it's very obvious that this is a growing and booming industry. Those are often less challenging problems to convince people that no, that you should be investing in this space. But for us, I think the market that we chose, was very difficult for us, because that we had to then convince people that no, that there still are problems here that really need to be solved before we could even convince them that we're the right people to solve those problems. So I think that was, for us, some of the biggest hurdles along the way is convincing people there was still a problem here.
Yeah, I think problem statement is also something that I think is really important, and it's not easy. It's not always easy to define a problem statement well. I feel there's a lot of people who they have a solution out there looking for a problem. And so I think that what you're saying is there are problems to solve. We're focused on the problems. And that's kind of what was the hard part to communicate and to get people to understand what those specifics were.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we talked about the hardest part. What about the best part for you?
The team that we have, I'd say that hands down, like, I'm blown away by our team that we have, our executive team, our leadership team. Like, it's so rewarding to be in this place where Boulevard as a company is bigger than any one person, myself included. And I think that that's such a healthy and exciting place to be, knowing that, Boulevard is now, has taken on a life of its own, and, is the result of so many people's collaboration coming together and working towards building the best technology we can for this industry. And, we've got such an incredible team that's empathetic with our customers. And, we have like 5 or 6 people on our team that are former salon and spa owners. And we've just imbued so much empathy and so much passion for this space within our entire team. And to see it, growing and having a life of its own greater than any one person is so rewarding. And so I think that, being able to come to work today and work with people who I genuinely feel are, can solve those problems far better than I can. And, we all work together to make the biggest difference we can. Like that's the best part, hands down.
Yeah, that's fun. Good people are so important. It's just, it makes you get up every day. It's the work is important, and being passionate about the work, but also being passionate about the people you're working with and is just top notch. So
absolutely.
No, this was super fun. I have a complete interest in seeing where Boulevard goes in the future and follow your successes. Is there a good way for us to follow your journey with Boulevard?
Absolutely. We're very active on LinkedIn. I'll give all my contact information. So, if you want to reach out to me directly or follow the company, we'll provide all of that for our listeners. But find us Boulevard. LinkedIn is probably a great place to start.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate the time today and all of the sharing.
Absolutely. Brandy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys so much. And I look forward to the next one.
Sounds good. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe and review the show. And for more information on IPX, visit ipxhq.com.